Welcome to Knowledge, Faith, and Belief. We gave a very, very brief introduction of what this is about, but now that this is the official class, let's just go through it one more time. We're here to stage an investigation. We're trying to figure out what is this thing called Emunah from a Jewish point of view, and then I think because we're not just living in a Jewish bubble, but we are also influenced by the wider Western culture, we are very much impacted by how the world understands the word faith and what does it mean to believe. So for us, these words rattle around in our heads and we have connotations. Do you know what the word connotation means? There's a denotation and a connotation. A denotation is like literally what something means. This denotes that. This means that. But a connotation comes from I think it's the Latin word con, meaning with, right? Con meaning with. Like congregate means to be gregarious, to be in a crowd with other people, congregate. So a connotation means that you have associations with the word. So even though we may come up with a textbook definition of belief or faith or know, we also have things that come along with it. We have a lot of baggage based on our upbringing and the popular culture around us of what does it mean to believe in something? What does it mean to have faith in something? I think that, and I might be mistaken, but for myself personally growing up, things like having faith or believing did not always carry the most positive connotations with them. Raise your hands if you kind of agree. Everybody here is like, no. Belief is great. Having faith is great. Okay, fine. Fair enough. Maybe if we were in a physicist convention, then the answers would be slightly different. But in any case, it's worthwhile trying to figure out and pick apart exactly how does the world see faith? How does the world see belief? So that we know what we're up against and we know what we're starting from so that we can try to either ask ourselves, do we agree with that or do we disagree with that? You know, one of the most helpful things that you can do in any context is before when you read something, any text, any Jewish text, before you start looking at what do the commentaries say? What do the rabbis say? Before you do that, pause and ask yourself, well, what do I say? What's my first initial reaction? What would I have said had nobody else told me what this thing means? And that's helpful for a number of reasons. Why might that be helpful? Yeah.
It makes it personal. It's like not some like faraway thing that some rabbis read once and said something about.
Good, fantastic. So the first thing is it gives you a little bit of relevance. Number two, what else? Why is it good for you to come up with your own opinion before you jump to whatever some other scholar or professional says? Yeah.
Because I guess you can't know your untainted belief if you already read this stuff. So before, is what you choose.
Good. Fantastic. You're about to imbibe somebody else's opinion. And before you do that, just make sure you had your own opinion in mind. Like, you're a player in the conversation too. And if all you do is just accept at face value what everybody else is saying, then it actually does kind of a couple things. Number one, it makes it more difficult for you to know what was the chiddush, what was the new idea that the expert is telling me that I didn't previously know. If I immediately jump to what the expert said, so then I may actually fool myself into thinking, well, that's what I always thought all along. And otherwise, if you generate your own opinion first, you can say, oh, wow, that's so interesting that I said this and they said that. Let me compare the two. Why did I say what I said versus what they said? Because then I can learn something. So that's extremely instrumental in and of itself. And the other thing, if I could be so bold, is to say, maybe you disagree. Maybe there's a point of disagreement between you and the expert. Now, it could be that 9 times out of 10, the expert's right and you're wrong. And that's okay, because then you'll grow from that. But it could also be that you also have an opinion that's correct. It's not impossible to say. And I don't think I'm a heretic for saying so. that it's entirely possible that you can read some previous scholar on a particular story in the Torah or some philosophical idea, and you say to yourself, well, to be honest, I think I have a new perspective on this. So for all the above reasons, it's worthwhile thinking about it ourselves. So last time I asked you to identify, what does faith mean to you? What does belief mean to you? And we had a lot of different opinions. Some people said that faith means trust. Some people said that faith means not knowing, not proving something, but being able to say, I believe it even though I think it's true, even though I don't know it's true. Belief also being a question of, to what extent do I have to have evidence before I'm ready to accept something as true? So this is what we're going to speak about today. And the way that I want to introduce this, the way that I want to approach the baggage that we carry in popular culture, is by looking at one of the most recently famous antagonists, opponents of faith, and try to figure out, what did they think faith meant? So we're going to start with a text, which is maybe a slightly unorthodox way of starting a Jewish class on faith. We're going to look at a text, a book that was written by one of the most famous atheists of the 20th and 21st centuries. And he goes by the name of Christopher Hitchens. Have you ever heard of Christopher Hitchens? Raise your hand if you heard of Christopher Hitchens. So Christopher Hitchens famously was considered one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. They were these four atheists who were, I guess, the most prominent atheists in the late 20th, early 21st century. Most of them are still alive. He died, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, maybe some of you are more familiar with Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, the Cambridge physicist, and Daniel Dennett, who's a philosopher in America. And they are all outspoken atheists and quite strong in their opinions against religion. So, Christopher Hitchens, he wrote an uncontroversial book called God Is Not Great. What a title, huh? It's a way to get headlines. I remember that when I was in university, one of the other horsemen came out with his book. Richard Dawkins wrote a book called The God Delusion. The God Delusion. And then somebody else wrote a response to that book called The Dawkins Delusion. So you see, it got pretty heated. It was like a real machlokas, you know. So Christopher Hitchens writes in God Is Not Great, faith is the surrender of the mind. It's the surrender of reason. It's the surrender of the only thing that makes us different from other animals. It's our need to believe and to surrender our skepticism and our reason, our yearning to discard that and put all our trust or faith in someone or something that is the sinister thing to me. That's Hitchens speaking. Out of all of the virtues, all the supposed virtues, faith must be the most overrated. The most overrated. Okay, fighting words. Interesting to note that Dawkins later revealed that although he was raised in a British Catholic school system, Catholic school? One of the maybe the Church of England, one of the schools, one of the Christian schools in England. In fact, his mother was born Jewish. So turns out that 2 of the 4 horsemen of the atheist apocalypse were actually Jewish, which doesn't actually surprise me if you think about it. Like there's a lot of atheist Jews, and of those atheist Jews, I think a lot of them have a lot more baggage than others do about their religion. This guy is even worse. He has the inherent Jewish guilt, as well as all the Christian, the Christian school guilt. So like that I think formed the perfect storm of the outspoken atheist. Now, what I'd like to know from you is, how do you think Christopher Hitchens defines atheism? I'm sorry, Emunah, faith. How does Christopher Hitchens define faith? Yes, what's your name?
Miriam.
Miriam, okay.
I think he thinks that faith is like despite like other proof, despite logic and reason, and like thinking about the actual issue, you just believe, oh, it's because God this, and you don't actually use your mind to think about how.
Okay, great. Good. So faith is instead of reason, instead of thinking. So faith involves the absence of all those things that I told you to do just 5 minutes ago, to think of your own opinion and all of that stuff. Don't do that. Have faith means turn off your brain. Yeah? Anybody else? Any other thoughts? What else can we get from Christopher Hitchens? Yes?
You said that it makes us different from other animals.
Please remind me your name.
Chaya.
Chaya. It's been a long summer. Okay.
He said that it's making us different from other animals. He's saying that other animals do use their brain, and that we're just the only ones like that are completely different.
Okay, so he says it's the surrender of the only thing that makes us different from other animals. In other words, what's the only thing that makes us different from other animals? Reason.
Yeah.
Reason and skepticism, right? The ability to think for yourself is what an animal does. And faith is kind of the blind following of the sheep to the shepherd. Yeah. Okay. So again, it's the lack of individualism. It's the lack of the ability to say, I have my own opinion. Yes.
I think it also, to have faith, I think he's also saying that, like she said over there, just that,
What's your name? I'm sorry.
Leo,
Liel.
despite everything, you also need to go based on your values as well, not only just, like, reason. I feel like also like your values.
Okay, so you can have certain values, and having faith might mean sacrificing those values.
Sometimes possibly.
Okay. Now he also says that faith is called a value. Yes? Oh, he's got so much courage. She's got so much patience. He's got so much faith. He's a man of faith. Usually that's used in a positive term. And Hitchens turns that on its head and says, to be called a person of faith should be an insult. Should be a disgrace to be called a person of faith. Yeah.
I think he's just summing faith up as negligence and sort of saying that a person who doesn't have that sort of faith could be a greater person by thinking for themselves.
Okay. So you're doing something dangerous and irresponsible by having faith. Okay? So going back to Miriam, right? So going back to what Miriam said, faith, he very clearly spells it out. Faith, it's like a math equation. Faith is not reason. It's not skepticism. It's not thinking for yourself. So when we had our own thoughts about what does faith mean, so I think some of us ventured into the waters of, well, faith means believing something even if you don't have proof or don't have evidence. Yeah? That would seem to be the extreme of what Christopher Hitchens is saying here, is that in order to have faith almost means to go against the evidence. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, when I was in university, I took a class on the philosophy of religion. And shockingly little Jewish philosophy taught in that class. But there were other philosophies from other religious denominations, which I won't mention explicitly, which extolled the virtue of something called blind faith. You've heard of this phrase before? Blind faith. Blind faith. What is blind faith? Blind faith is, I think, everything that we've been saying so far. It means that even in the face of evidence to the contrary, you will believe the opposite. So what would be an example of blind faith? Blind faith might say, well, have you ever seen a miracle? You ever seen the sea split? You ever seen the sun stop? No? No? So how could you possibly believe in miracles?
That's such a limited thing of space.
All right, fine. We'll get there. Don't worry. We'll defend miracles eventually. And And by the way, I'm not laughing. I don't want to suggest that, ha ha ha, you idiot atheists. Like, we have to take their points seriously, because our own positions, our own beliefs will be strengthened when we're able to defend them against people who are seriously attacking them. So we have to take his point seriously. How dare you say that there is a invisible deity who's running the show if you've never seen him, you've never heard him? Did he ever talk to you? Yeah, he did. So go to a mental institution. This is what Christopher Hitchens is saying. He's not mentioning religion explicitly in this, but the book is called God is Not Great, which suggests that the book is basically, if there was a God, we wouldn't be such big fans. So Christopher Hitchens is saying that to have faith in no uncertain terms means to go against your capacities of logic and reason. Your capacities of logic and reason are the greatest sources of truth, the greatest way that you could arrive at what's real, and you're choosing to close your eyes to that. Surrender. Don't think for yourself. It's too hard, or maybe it's not real. Yeah, see, that's the other thing you have to think about. Is faith conditioning us to do things that are dangerous for us? On the one hand, you could say that what faith is doing is saying, look, I know that what you see is real, but faith is asking you to believe something else, something higher. But it sounds like what Christopher Hitchens is saying is that a person who has the value of faith, they're going to run into trouble in a lot of other areas in their lives. Imagine if you performed scientific experiments on the basis of faith. Well, those have happened. Have you ever heard, how many of you have studied, going out on a limb here, communist Russia? Have you ever heard of a guy named Lysenko? There's something called Lysenkoism. So under Stalinist Russia, so they had a lot of theories. They were into theories, right? Theories of government. If we get everybody to share everything and nobody earns on the basis of what they work for, but rather everyone gets what they deserve, so then that will create a collective sense of responsibility and everyone will chip in and there won't be jealousy anymore and there won't be inequality anymore, and that will be a perfect society. The problem is when you test that, it doesn't pan out. So they had another theory. They had another theory about how to grow certain crops. Now, it wasn't based on any scientific data, but it was based on theories. It was based on their beliefs about how the world should work. Lysenko was in charge of this program to re-engineer the farming system, the agricultural system in all of the USSR, which resulted in something around 5 million deaths. 5 million dead people because of famine. So that would be an example of performing science based on faith. Yeah.
As real as that is, that's an extreme. That's the other side of the extreme of the issue. I think in general, faith is the acceptance that you don't have control over everything. And it's very much a middle path. And we as Jews know that we always try to find the middle path.
Okay, great. So let's talk about that. Sorry, I'm going to just spend the first little bit of this class just being the atheist in the room, because it's worthwhile getting all of the arguments out first, right? So, Ella said, isn't faith, look, you're being a little bit harsh, aren't you? Faith is the acceptance that we can't know everything. We can't control everything. So maybe we need faith. Maybe we need faith. So let me share with you one of the arguments against that understanding of faith. How many of you have heard of a phrase called the God of the gaps? God of the gaps. Ever heard of that? Nobody. Okay. So the God of the gaps theory is a theory that goes as follows. 6,000 years ago, at the dawn of humanity, or human civilization, I guess if you want to call it, people turned upwards to the sky, and every once in a while they would hear these incredibly loud sounds and watch these streaks of light appear across the sky. And of course, they hadn't developed the understandings of electromagnetism yet at all, and they didn't know how negatively charged ions line up in the atmosphere during a storm to create an electrical current. So they looked up at the sky and they said, "This is the thunderbolt of Zeus." That's what it is. So the God of the gaps theory basically says that whatever we cannot explain, we ascribe to God. We say, oh, that must be God, right? We don't know how, I don't know, people are born. God is the creator of humanity. We don't know where the universe came from. God is the creator of the universe. But the problem with that is that eventually, once you develop modern theories of science, so then we know that human beings are born out of fertilized embryos. We know that the universe came out of a singular Big Bang event, which is now being disputed, but okay, for argument's sake. We can eventually explain everything according to science, so that now the realm of God gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So there's even an argument against this idea that Elle is saying, which is that we need faith, because faith can't explain everything. So what do you say to that? Yeah.
I don't think that's the realm of God getting smaller. I just think that that's us having a deeper understanding of God's creation.
Great, okay, fine. So you'll say, okay, fine. So God uses the human embryos to create humanity, and God uses the laws of physics, yes, but eventually we see the world becoming more and more demystified. We are less and less baffled by what's going on in the world. And eventually, if we can come up with a scientific explanation for everything, so why do we need God anymore?
Just because we have a scientific explanation doesn't mean it makes sense.
Oh, okay. What's your name?
Dahlia?
Dahlia. Okay. So we can come up with scientific explanations for almost everything. And yet, Dahlia says, we still need something called faith. Fantastic. Dahlia, can you please read the next source on the sheet by Rabbi Sachs in a phenomenal book on the relationship between science and religion called The Great Partnership? Highly recommend it. Go ahead.
Faith would seem to be redundant in the contemporary world, and yet, far from disappearing, it is alive and well and flourishing. Why is this so? Because religion does what none of the great institutions of contemporary society does. It answers the three great questions that any reflective human being will ask. Who am I? Why am I here? And how then shall I live? Okay, so Rabbi Sachs addresses this problem head on. He says, it would seem that faith is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It would seem like faith is unnecessary today, and yet, he says, faith is alive and well. There are as many people in the world today, if not more, who have ever existed, who still have something called faith. So why is that? Because science can't answer every question. Science can answer the how, maybe the what, not the why. Not the why. And he addresses three questions. Who am I? Oh, I'm a multi-celled organism whose brain is run through electric currents in the neurons, which sends signals to the nervous system, which creates reflexes in the muscles and the skeleton. No. Who am I? Who am I? Who is the I? How is it that this bundle of neurons can actually even ask a question like that? Why am I here? Why am I here? What do you mean, why are you here? You're a complex organism. You're here to reproduce and survive and perpetuate the future of the species. No. Okay, maybe that's part of who I am on a larger scale, but why I'm here is so much deeper than this kind of survival mode. And where am I going? Where am I going? And that's something that really separates us from the animals, right? The animals are not future-oriented beings. In the sense that they ask, I always found that it was the funniest thing in the world
at the beginning of the movie Ratatouille, you have this rat, this very pensive rat. Like, isn't there more to life than just looking through garbage cans? Said no rat ever, because there's a rat. A rat will accept its environment, and it will either thrive or not, but it will never wonder, is there something more? So these are the questions that still perpetuate, and it starts to force us to ask, okay, how do these questions relate back to our definition of faith? If this is the link that Rabbi Sacks is drawing between faith and these questions, so then maybe it doesn't have so much to do with the idea of believing something without evidence. Why am I here and who am I? It doesn't even make sense to ask the question, what evidence do you have? What do you mean? These are natural existential questions that I think about, depending on how overthinky you are, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. Every now and then I ask myself, like, why am I here? And that has nothing to do with evidence. There are simply questions that cannot be answered, given the available scientific knowledge. And no amount of scientific knowledge can ever answer that. In his book, Rabbi Sacks has this great line, which he repeats multiple times. He says, science takes things apart to see how they work. Religion puts things together to see what they mean. So catchy, I remember it after years of having read the book. So we want to know why. How do we make sense of this? What's it all for? And those are the questions that we begin to associate with faith. And is that a surrender of reason? No, not at all. There's a guy, his last name is, I'm blanking on his last name. He's a modern physicist who, at a certain point in his career, was considered maybe like the next Darwin. They said he was the next Darwin. Why? Because he had developed an experiment that showed how inorganic matter can actually self-assemble to become organic matter. Now, the reason why that's so important is because that's one step before the how we could possibly explain how life came to be in a universe, right? Because everyone wants to know, how do you get from just carbon and hydrogen and oxygen into some sort of conscious being that reproduces and moves and wants to use energy, right? All of these things that we associate with living organisms. And so this physicist, is he a physicist? No, he was a biologist, I guess. He came up with a way to show that not that you could get life, but that you could get these atoms that turn into things like enzymes and amino acids, things that are necessary for the basis of life. And people were calling him like the next Darwin. Now, it happens to be that this guy is a religious Jew, Orthodox Jew. And they asked him, does this not challenge your beliefs? And he said, absolutely not. I want to figure out how God made life. But this doesn't tell me why God made life. So it doesn't change in any way my relationship to why I need something beyond what I can observe through a microscope to be able to ask deeper questions. So that's how Jonathan Sacks understands it. Similarly, the Chazon Ish. Have you ever heard of the Chazon Ish? Yeah? Big rabbi in Europe who moved before the Holocaust to Israel, and he's the one who really built up Bnei Brak. He was considered one of the absolutely one of the greatest rabbinic minds of the 20th century. And the Chazon Ish has a whole book called Emunah Ubitachon, a really beautiful book. And towards the beginning of the book, he says something so poetic. If a person is in touch with their soul, and they have a moment of tranquility, free from the burden of desires, and their eyes dazzle from the spectacle of the heavens above and the depths of the earth. You look around at this incredibly exquisite world, and you are moved, not just by the complexity of mitochondria, but simply by the beauty of a sunset. They become excited and astonished, for the world appears before them as a mysterious riddle, concealed and wondrous, and this riddle surrounds their heart and mind, and they're like one who is bewildered. No breath of life remains within them, except for their entire focus and purpose being directed towards the riddle, and the knowledge of its solution consumes their soul. I think what the Chazon Ish is describing is this why. There's a feeling which he's describing, and it's a feeling called awe. A-W-E, awe. Awe is what happens when you apprehend something that's greater than you, much greater than you, something that's beyond comprehension. And this is not the God of the gaps. This is not like, oh, eventually, you know what it's like? It's like looking at the most beautiful sunset. You're like, I'm just awestruck by that. And somebody else says to you, well, what are you talking about? I can tell you the frequency of the wavelength of the colors of orange and pink and yellow that are contained in that sunset. So what's so elaborate about it? It's like, I'm sorry, buddy, but something's being lost in translation here. You're talking about measuring waves, and I'm beholding a sunset that takes my breath away. No amount of measurement of waves will make me not have awe at a sunset. That's what the Chazon Ish is getting at. So we start to see again that there is something else, something besides the God of the gaps, and something besides what we might even call reason. How would Christopher Hitchens respond to this idea? You who are marveling at a sunset. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, isn't it? I can tell you the measurement of the waves. I can tell you what's going on in your brain to produce some feeling of reverence. And you're like, yes, but isn't it quite interesting that I find myself here at this point in this time, that I'm experiencing such a moment of awe? No amount of brain chemistry can tell me what the experience is, can demystify the experience. I think we sometimes have that problem in the 21st century, is that so many things are explained away that we've kind of demystified the world itself. So we no longer tap into those moments of awe because we've been like, I live in a Western, progressive, modern society. Like, I don't need to be wonderstruck anymore. Okay, there's one last thing I want to show you, but I don't remember what time we're supposed to end. No, we go until 1:45, right? Is an hour long?
I think like 4:50.
Oh, 4:50? Great, fine, fantastic. So there's one more thing that I want to show you. I want to try to dispel a misconception, which is that as we're going through this question of what is faith, what is Emunah, I mentioned to you previously that first of all, we're going to explore multiple opinions within the Jewish tradition. So already you're going to get lots of different perspectives. And I also want to just flag right now, it could be that in 3 months from now, you're going to tell me, I like it all. It's all interesting. I don't know how much I've moved the needle in terms of my relationship with God. Or I don't know if you've convinced me, Rabbi. That's not my job here, but we will, as I've mentioned, go through some of the proofs. We'll go through some of the evidence. I'm just not convinced. And I want to just say right now that the mitzvah of having Emunah, is not just getting to the end goal. It's not just being there. So if you take a look on the other side of the page, the Nesivos Shalom, the Slonimer Rebbe of the early 20th century, wrote something absolutely amazing. He said, the true understanding of the mitzvah of Emunah in Hashem is the effort that a person exerts in attaining Emunah. Striving for Emunah is the most important part of fulfilling the mitzvah. One who simply believes without truly knowing based on an inner natural Emunah has not filled the mitzvah. In other words, you're not born with Emunah, or rather, you're not born having fulfilled the mitzvah of Emunah. It's the act of seeking, the act of striving, the act of trying to figure it out. That is part of the mitzvah of Emunah. So if you come to me at the end of 3 months and you say, I've been really working on this, and I'm really searching after a definition, a personal understanding, and I'm not there yet, but I'm on my journey. So then I would say, congratulations, Rabbi Friedman, you've done a good job. If I get you to go on the journey, where you get to is a very personal thing. But together, we're going to see where the path leads. And that's part of the mitzvah of Emunah. Okay, so in summary, and then I'll let you guys go early because what the heck. We started off with what I think is, let's say, the pop culture definition of faith. That it's amazing to me that when I asked you guys at the beginning of this class, like how many of you have a negative association with faith, almost none of you raised your hands. See, I grew up in a incredibly liberal environment where the school that I went to, religion was almost not a subject. The first exposure I got to, I was given about religion was in 8th grade when we read a book, or 7th grade, called Inherit the Earth. Inherit the Earth. It was a play. The book was a stage play about what was called the Scopes Monkey Trial. Have you ever heard of this? Well, the Scopes Monkey Trial, I think, took place in the 1920s in the American South when a science teacher tried to teach evolution. And they put him in jail. And this big city lawyer from New York, I think, came down to defend him. And it was basically him defending against this kind of Southern Christian lawyer who was trying to make the case that this person was blaspheming and was misleading children, right? And the long story short of it is the play essentially showed how the erudite, intellectual, modern science teacher and lawyer who represented him was clearly on the side of reason, and this Southern Christian lawyer was a buffoon. So that was my first exposure in school to how you see religion. Exactly the way that Christopher Hitchens laid it out, is that on the one side you have faith, and on the other side you have reason, and never the twain shall meet. They're actually direct opposites of each other. And so I think that if you go into a lot of modern institutions of higher learning, into philosophy departments, into science departments, this will be the overriding approach to faith and religion that you're going to get, which is that, isn't religion so quaint? It's so nice for all those people hundreds of years ago who had no choice but to believe in God and to fall in line because they thought God was going to punish them. But now we know otherwise. Now we are enlightened. This is, I think, the modern misconception. And by the way, even within religious ideas, this conception is perpetuated. So there was this great series of movies in the late 80s and early 90s called Indiana Jones, which they've tried to revive, from what I hear, not to great effect. But the first one was outstanding. And the second one was a little bit strange. And the third one was also excellent. And in the third movie, they are on a quest for the Holy Grail, which, bless you guys, probably you don't know much about, but it's this mythology that Jesus had this cup from which anybody who drank from it would have eternal life. Okay, and they were looking for this grail. And one of the tests, as they were getting closer and closer, they were seeing these miraculous things. And one of the tests to get to the grail was this incredibly wide chasm. And the test was this leap of faith. The leap of faith. Couldn't get any more explicit than that. The leap of faith. And there's Indiana Jones, a young, dashing Harrison Ford, who's standing there and he's like, this is impossible. Like, you can't jump over this incredibly wide canyon. Like, it's just too far. I'll never make it. And you hear his father, played by Sean Connery in the background, you have to believe, my son. You have to believe, right? And there he is, and there's Indiana Jones, and it's this beautiful, like, look it up on YouTube, right? And he's like standing and he has this moment of clarity. And he picks up his foot and he just walks off. And he stands on something. And it's invisible. It's completely invisible. And what he knows is there's this invisible bridge, right, that allows him to cross the canyon. Now, you couldn't get a better kind of encapsulation, a visual encapsulation of what people think faith means, which is, right, what is this movie saying faith is? It's blind faith. It's a leap of faith. I have no evidence to suggest that this is going to work. In fact, on the contrary, I know what gravity is, and I know that there's no way that I can get across, but I'm going to do it anyway. Against all rationality, against all logic, my faith defies logic. My faith is the opposite of logic, the surrender of the mind. That's what Christopher Hitchens is telling us. And yet, without giving a definition yet, we have Rabbi Sachs and the Chazon Ish who are telling us, wait a minute, before we start getting into, well, what is faith and what is not faith, we already know that there are things in our lives that science, reason, enlightenment will never reach the bottom of. These questions that are so mysterious that no amount of reason will get to the answer. And for that, we might need something else. The gap never closes on mystery, on why I'm here. That's the thing that will never be answered by let's call it the left side of the brain, the quantitative rational mind. So for that, we need something else. So this is where we begin our inquiry. So now it's nice to see what we're up against. It's nice to see how there's now an opening for us to explore and examine what is faith. Because if it's not believing in something without any evidence, then we have to figure out exactly what it is. So that's what we're going to start to do next time, which will be in about a month from now. So in the meantime, have a wonderful Sukkot, and I'll see you in late October.